Hi, everybody. This is Jim Safran with Pure Vintage Media, and welcome to our podcast. Today, we're going to be speaking to Derek Shulman upon the release of his new biography, Giant Steps, which chronicles his long career as a touring musician with two bands he co-founded with brothers Ray and Phil, Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, as well as, of course, Gentle Giant. But in 1982, Derek had a second act, stepping behind the desk, and over the next 25 years became one of the leading executives in the music industry, responsible for finding, nurturing, and developing talent such as Bon Jovi, Nickelback, Pantera, Slipknot, and even reviving the careers of Bad Company and AC/DC. So stick around, I think you're going to enjoy this. And now, Derek Shulman, Giant Steps. Hey, Derek.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. Yeah. Can you hear me and see me okay?
I can. It's perfect.
Okay,
And
good.
I'm sure you're backed up back to back with interviews all day, right?
I have, in fact. I've got four back to back, which is, I've got my water ready and I should have other things, but I'm fine.
Wonder-
You have me right on the first of the day.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation, by the way, yesterday. That was nice.
Yeah.
The problem with these interviews, there's too much information. There's just so much information over your entire career. And I was thinking about different biographies that I've read recently, and it touched me that you started off with kind of a tragic event in your life, losing a parent at a pretty young age. And I was really moved by that. Um, as I told you yesterday, I lost my father when I was very young. And I think I might have been more like Ray. I was a little too young to really kind of understand the implications. But the way you illustrated it was very, very touching. Um, and you can see, uh, as you say, despite some of his hedonistic ways, he was a real influence on your life and probably had a lot to do with the man you are today. Very, very touched by that. Your dad played trumpet, correct?
He played, well, he was a trumpeter, a jazz trumpeter and leader of they called it then a dance band, but he was a jazz trumpeter but he could play any instrument. I mean, anything that was around him, he was able to, he played clarinet also, he played, bagpipes, you name it, he could play, but that was his main instrument, the trumpet, yes.
Um, so you have I'm going to go through the family here. Phil was the oldest,
I
correct?
No, no, Phil's the eldest brother. I had my
Oh,
sister.
so Evelyn was the oldest.
Evelyn was the oldest, yes.
Evelyn, Phil, yourself, Terry, and then of course
And
Ray,
then,
who we lost in 2023. Um, that was fascinating to hear that your sister was a singer. I know she contributed some songs to you guys in the early days. That's pretty interesting. And she was married to John King, who seemed to have played a role for you in the beginning with Simon Dupree and the Big Sound.
yes, he was the manager, and in fact, he was able to get us the appointment, if you like, at EMI, and get the record deal that we first had as Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, and he was our manager until after we had the big hit, and then he was also he was very very busy himself as a BBC producer, television producer. So he rescinded his throne, if you like, ultimately towards the end of that group to Jerry Braun, and Jerry Braun took over management of Simon Dupree, knowing that we were going to change into Gentle Giant, effectively.
You know, there was no, I had no knowledge of Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, obviously, until the internet happened. And even then, had no idea until I started reading more interviews with you or watching more interviews with you. And I went back, of course, and YouTube's wonderful because it's forever on YouTube. And I was just, I don't think people realize that you were involved in that whole, call it the Beatlemania type hysteria that went through England at the time. And tripped across an interesting video called The Ravers, I think it was, and and to watch you uh, to go from a band just starting out to all of a sudden now girls are wanting you to sign their breasts and their arms and grabbing a kiss from you as you dash off into the limousine, well, into the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was hilarious. I don't think people realize that background with you. Some of those songs, I went back and listened to a lot of the Simon Dupree songs, and they were really well written, great pop standards. I know there were certain groups that you admired from America. Um, but I was always fascinated. How did that? And by the way, the one with the pirates, that was an interesting video, and it reminded me a little bit of Herman's Hermits, and I'm sure that's one you'd probably prefer to live down.
Yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
I was always fascinated. What was the? And then I read in the book, and I think I understand this. Uh, how do you go from that, especially the pirate one, to all of a sudden making this groundbreaking album, Gentle Giant? The leap is unbelievable, and it sounded like the key was, of all people, Elton John introducing you to Spirit, which was one of my favorite groups growing up, and obviously California based.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Well, we were developing, the one thing that Simon Dupree and the Big Sound gave us as Gentle Giant was almost an apprenticeship for stagecraft, if you like, because we were, believe it or not, very, very popular in Europe, even before the big hit, which we had in 1967. We
That would be
played.
Kites. That would be Kites.
Yeah, the Kites, which is a top 10, top five record. We had several which are bubbling under in the top 40. But we played everywhere. I mean, we played literally 300 gigs a year or more. And that's when you develop both your craftsmanship and your musicianship. So, as a teenager, in England at that time, it was a fantastic period because there was a lot of changes going on. The Beatles, of course, changed everything in the culture across the board in England and probably America too, certainly musically as well as culturally. And they changed everything for me as well. But yeah, we went from the group Simon Dupree because to Gentle Giant because we were stymied. We almost had a millstone around our necks, having a couple of big hits and not able to move on because we were getting better and better musically, physically, and everything else. And understanding that it was just more out there than R&B and soul, and listening to other bands doing different things, as you said, like Spirit, which we were tipped off by Elton, and Zappa, of course, and just other music, and doing something which is very different. And we were stuck in a situation where we were playing what they were called Scampi and Chip Circuit, where you got a very good a fee. I mean, our fees were very, very high, but there were literally people there eating Scampi and chips and waiting for the hits. And to play that kind of circuit was very soul destroying. So at that point, when we were at the point of where we had enough of that, we said, okay, we have to stop this and we're going to go on to something else. We don't know what it is. And we told Jerry Braun, our manager, that we wanted to stop Simon Dupree and do something completely different. We didn't know what it was or who we were, but he believed in the brothers, the Shulman brothers. And he said, okay, I'll finance you. And that was the birth of Gentle Giant.
And aside from everybody else who was in your orbit at that time, they wanted you to continue to duplicate Simon Dupree and the Big Sound. You guys had bigger ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Jerry Braun seemed to have played an important part in your career also, in that he showed total support for what you wanted to do. And is he the one that introduced you to Tony Visconti?
Yes, to a degree, sure. Tony was kind of just coming through as a jobber producer at that point. Excuse me. Yeah, he said, Jerry got us the deal, if you like, with Vertigo Records, which is a branch of Phonogram, and after financing the band to put the band together. And when we put the band together, he said, "Let's get Tony Visconti as a producer." And we went into the studio to Trident Studios with Tony, and we made our first album with him. Yeah.
It seemed like the perfect storm. Jerry, and a producer who kind of got what you wanted to do. I think you've told me in the past that you almost felt like he was also a member of the band, and he wrote, to this day, a little confusing to me, and I tried to decipher them, but the wonderful liner notes, the crazy liner notes for the first album. And it just seemed like the right producer at the right time. And boy, when that album came out, I was working for a English import record store in Van Nuys, California, and that came out and it absolutely blew my mind. There was no information other than what we would get from Melody Maker magazine, was always kind of a month old by the time it hit LA. But everybody in the store was like, "Who is this?" And it really made an impression on me. But I said to myself, how did they go from Simon Dupree, really well done pop songs? There's no doubt about it. You guys were tight as a wet knot, but all of a sudden to go to this mind-blowing, and it was the time period, 69, 70, a lot of things were happening, but it's just such an incredible leap. And I'm glad you did, because it's the kind of music that is sustaining. I love the story that you tell in the book about, now you guys got to hang around Abbey Road quite a bit, and got to know a lot of the, I wouldn't call them faculty, but the artists that were there, honing their craft, recording. And you tell an incredible story. Do you mind repeating it about John and Yoko's bed? Because that's pretty funny.
Well, we recorded in Simon Dupree and the Big Sound. We were signed to Parlophone Records, and any band that was signed to EMI generally would be recording at Abbey Road. And that was just a fantastic, when I think back about Abbey Road, we were incredibly lucky that we had the deal with EMI and had that apprenticeship, if you like. So we'd go in, and usually you go in for a 3-hour session. That's how long you had to do your single, and that's what you did in those days. So I think it was between second and third single when we went in. No, maybe it was went in, and we saw, this is Simon Dupree, a bed in the studio, and we thought, wow, this is, yeah. And then we saw strewn around the Beatles instruments all over the studio. I mean, they had the run of it. I mean, we came in for 3 hours. However, if the Beatles said we're going to be in the studio for 4 days or 5 days, they had the run of the place. So they left their equipment there. But for whatever reason, we were able to get a 3-hour session for one of our singles. So we went in, and sure enough, their instruments were there, including the Bellotron and everything else, and the bed, that John and Yoko dragged in. And of course, being the idiots that we are, me and Phil said, "Is that bed we've heard about? Come on, let's jump on it like a trampoline," which we started to do. And the bed sheets were flying everywhere, and God knows, and even the people upstairs, Jeff Emmerich and our producer, were laughing. And in walked John and Yoko.
Oof.
If you want to say a big oops. that was an oops, and John was not, he was a little upset. I mean, he said, "Hey guys, come on, get the hell out of here." But Yoko was a little more direct and to the point, saying what she said, basically. You'll read it in the book. And so we scurried off that bed, and I said, it wasn't me, it was his idea. That was me being.
You're blaming somebody else,
I
just
blamed
like a big
it.
brother, right?
They'll blame it on Phil. It was in both of our ideas, of course.
Yeah.
And he skulked upstairs into the control room and said, "Oh, sorry, we didn't mean it." And of course, the bed was a mess. The sheets were everywhere, and
Oh my God.
they were looking at us skulking upstairs and pretending we were invisible. So.
And of course, you couldn't resist playing their instruments, right?
Oh no! Listen, are you kidding? They had the Gretsch and they had the Rickenbackers all them amazing setups, and of course we played. Of course.
Had you guys ever seen a Mellotron before that?
Yeah, we had actually, because the studio had an incredible Mellotron, which didn't have just three or four um, voices, the tapes. They had a Mellotron at Abbey Road that has sound effects as well.
Right.
I mean, the Abbey Road was an incredible, laboratory, in fact. And just saying that, a lot of people don't know that Abbey Road, the engineers and the tape ops used to wear lab coats. They actually, instead of there it was literally uniforms. So your engineer wore lab coats.
Lab coats and suit and ties, right?
Yeah, the producer, the guy in charge, the George Martins and the Nori Paramores, they wear the suits, but the engineers and the tape ops would wear lab coats.
Synthesizers were always okay. Those are cool, but it was the Mellotron that felt like the earth was moving at times. And a lot of progressive bands used that early on in their albums, and you still see them for sale on vintage sites here and there. It's amazing. I guess you would call it an instrument, a tape device.
They always taking them on the road, which we tried in both Simon Dupree and Gentle Giant. They were awful to take on the road because generally the tapes would spill over onto the floor. They go out of tune and so they were terrible to take on the road, but in the studio they were a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, it's a great instrument. I still love it. I don't know anybody's revived that in their music recently, but okay. So now in here we're trying to I'm trying not to leave anything out. Aside from Spirit, you really liked Frank Zappa, and I find it and Miles Davis, who the first time I heard Bitches Brew, I started sweating. I didn't know what I was listening to. Frank Zappa, though, there's a clip on YouTube somewhere where he's saying, yeah, I don't really like anything that's out. But there is this one group called I'm paraphrasing, but there's this one group, Gentle Giant. They're very interesting. And I thought, wow, to be praised by Frank Zappa, that's a winner right there.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to meet him in person?
Yeah, we actually played with Zappa several times.
Oh, did you? In a double bill or?
Yeah, in concert, yeah. And
wow.
Yeah, we did several shows with Zappa, and we were, it was fantastic. I mean, they were Zappa and their band mothers. It wasn't them; it was Frank Zappa at that time.
Yeah.
They were fantastic. There was mutuality, and we were on the same plane, both musically and emotionally and everything else. It was fantastic to be.
You guys toured with everybody. I was looking at some of the old concerts. It's amazing all the different pairings that some of them kind of questionable, but certainly you played with everybody, and you really toured very heavily through the States.
Yeah.
I think the feeling I get is that you felt you were a little bit more, aside from maybe that one Gentle Giant, one Black Sabbath show at the Bowl. I think you were impressed by the reception that you got in the States.
Yeah.
And that's interesting for a band that largely came to everybody's attention through these English imports originally. Right. Tell about how it was an interesting story how Carrie Manier came into your life as you were forming Gentle Giant. I love how you were your background with Simon Dupree and some of your friends that were early bandmates. You ended up having to replace, and that's always tough to do because you knew you needed to up your game, but it also made you sharper in the bandmates that you selected for Gentle Giant. How did Carrie come into your life?
Completely by accident. Um, um, in fact, it was Phil who Phil and his wife they had a very big house, and they used to rent out a couple of rooms to students, and they had a student that that knew that that Phil was we were moving into to be in Gentle Giant, and we were looking for a new keyboard player, and someone who could lend something to whatever we would become. And he said to Phil, "I know a guy in Germany. He's stuck over there. His name's Kerry Minier. He's in a band called Rust. You might want to speak to him." We didn't know who he was or even how the student knew him. Anyway, the bottom line is Phil got in touch with Kerry, who was just coming over from Germany back to Dorset, where he lived in the south coast, and we didn't know what he played or how he played or who he was. But we said, "Why don't you come to Portsmouth?" Where we were in England, and we met, and we learned that he had the degree in composition and percussion from the Royal Academy of Music. So we said, we're auditioning keyboardists, including, by the way, Elton John at that time, but we'll get into it. We said to Kerry, what have you written? And he said, "Well, I was in this band. I got no money, and I've written several of these songs." And he started playing songs like "Nothing at All" and "Why Not" and "Funny Ways. And we thought, "Holy shit, we just hit gold." This is someone that we've been looking for all of our lives. And immediately he was in. And we said, "Kerry, come join the group. We have financing. We have money to pay you per week from Jerry Braun." And he was the first one on board. And he made such a difference to the Shulman brothers' lives. And was the heart in some ways, and the soul was my brother Ray, but he was certainly the heart of Gentle Giant. We founded by that accident of the student telling my brother Phil that he knew someone in Germany. So
Life is full of providence like that, isn't it? It's just, you
yeah.
never know. He and Ray really bonded immediately, didn't they?
Oh yeah, but absolutely. Ray was also an incredible, creative force, both musically and personally and every other way. And we bonded completely, and personally too. That was very very important. We were based on the South Coast in Portsmouth, and that was a key thing about the band. From the beginning to almost the end, was that we were a band, a real band, a real family, and we didn't live in different parts of the world and get together when we had to. We actually lived together, literally. I mean, we roomed together. We went when we weren't on the road, which is pretty much always. We would go out to the pub together. We go fishing together. So we were a family, in fact, in many ways, pretty much all the way through the whole period of Gentle Giant's time.
Amazing. And then I also love the story of how Gary joined you guys and his I guess mid audition discovery. Well, these guys are Simon Dupree, the big sound, and almost hit the door.
Well, that was his brother Jeff, who he came along for the audition, and Gary was, as I explained in the book, Gary was probably one of the first guitarists. We auditioned like 50 guitarists, but
Yeah.
he actually came in and said, "Can I tune up, please?" And boy, that was like, okay, you just hit the green button already. But then Jeff, his brother, elder brother, was a roadie for Soft Machine, and I didn't know this at the time. Gary told us afterwards that he saw the drum head on the kit, which at that point still said Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, and he whispered in his ear, said, "That's that stupid group." And Gary almost like apparently Gary almost like packed his guitar up and left before we even started.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we gave him the parts to play, and he was in. I mean, he's such an
Yeah.
amazing
Okay.
player. Amazing player, amazing creative force. Again, we were so lucky to get Gary as our guitarist.
And then to round it out, you only had one member from Simon Dupree that played with you in the beginning on drums, and
Yeah,
Mark Smith.
yeah, Martin came in at the very end, knowing that we were going to change to Simon Dupree. He was a kind of a jazzy drummer, and he played for a group called the Mojos in Southampton with he actually played with Ross Stewart. But so we knew that what we had going in from Simon Dupree to Gentle Giant, Martin probably would have fitted. I mean, ultimately he didn't, but for the first two records, he's a great guy and a very good drummer, but a little too jazzy for what
Yeah.
we ultimately wanted to be. Yeah.
You guys were so productive over like a 10-year period. I'm just going through the titles. Obviously, the first album, Gentle Giant, Acquiring the Taste. I always group those two together in my mind. And I don't know if because they were so close in being recorded, but they were similar. I love the cover. The cover was always misunderstood what it actually was, and I thought that was very kind of clever. I've told you before, the album that I still hold very close to my heart is Three Friends. And I wonder if through the years, I think maybe in the beginning you thought okay, but maybe through the years you've warmed up a lot more to that. I thought it was a fabulous album. It was a concept album in a way, but it wasn't over the top. It wasn't, with all due respect, it wasn't Quadrophenia. It wasn't Tommy. It was very subtle in the message it was sending. And I think I've told you this before. I understood the concept, but I hadn't experienced, you guys are a little bit older than me. I hadn't experienced that yet, where friends that grow up together end up in time following different paths. And as time has gone on, that album has gotten even closer to my heart. I really love that album. Octopus was a mind blower. That's probably my favorite, to be honest with you. You
Right.
guys took a little bit of a new direction, and sadly, that was the last one that Phil was on. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. That was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
No,
then yeah,
no, Octopus is one of my top three or four favorites. Also, I mean, I think it was the. I think this Octopus was kind of the matures of what the initial Gentle Giant idea was supposed to be, as a six piece. And I think both musically, it really worked, and we had and lyrically, it's very really interesting. That's a lot of Phil's lyrics and my lyrics also, but I think it was a zenith of a period of time when Phil was in the band. And we also had a great uh, engineer slash co-producer in Martin Rushton, who was very intrinsic and made the atmosphere in the studio very light and airy, as opposed to get down and dirty, which we were. I mean, we were workaholics, and he made us a little cool down a little and make something which was easier to make. And I think it reflects well on what was produced ultimately with the album Octopus.
Glass House must have been somewhat of a cathartic effort for you. Um, and at that point, you're taking over pretty much all the lyric responsibilities. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah, and some of the musical pieces too. So I contributed about 15 to 20%, and Gary and Kerry and Ray, of course, were the main composers. Yeah, that was a tough album to make because my brother Phil, who was in the earliest incarnations of Simon Dupree and Gentle Giant, he left and left, and it was a tough time for him, and it was a tough time for us, as siblings. We lived together effectively and worked together and fought together,
Yeah.
as
As
siblings.
brothers do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he was gone. And it was like, okay, there was a big hole left. What do we do? Okay, we have to fill the hole with who we are. And it took a bit of time, and then we went right into the studio and made In a Glass House. And I think it showed it was a new direction for the band. And I think ultimately it was a better direction. And I've been working on just a sidebar on In a Glass House recently again.
I was gonna, yeah.
And in fact, actually, it was a tough record to make and a tough record to hear, but at that time. But now I'm listening to it. It's actually really, really good.
Yeah, it is. I'm surprised that it was not released originally in the US. Some of my favorite songs are on there. Um, and yeah, that was a shame. But it was released in the UK.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of fans of the band have come to really, really appreciate that album. I'm glad you took that sidebar because the epilogue to the book talks about yet another. First off, I think people, maybe they don't know, most of your tapes have been preserved, um, except that one. And you stayed in there. It may have disappeared in that fire in Los Angeles years ago, where a lot of valuable tapes were lost. However, do you want to tell the story? We might as well jump ahead because the epilogue is a wonderful story, not only about what you've been able to do with Glass House. And I want to ask you, is that available anywhere yet? Is
Oh,
it going to be?
yes, it will be. And
Wonderful.
next year,
Could you tell that? I hate to jump to the epilogue, but could you tell that story since we're talking about it? Because another section where I shed a tear when I was reading it, it was very touching.
well, yeah, but well, I'm in the process now. In the studio, I'm using in Brooklyn. It's an AI program, but it's not just any old AI. It's the highest end AI that's just been invented, and we're able to actually separate the tracks, not just the stems, from each other, and it's just an incredible way of doing something which was impossible probably 6 months ago or 9 months ago. So I've been in the studio remixing In a Glass House to the way it should have been, and we would love to have had it when we did it in 1974, I believe, or whatever it was. And so that will be available next year. And it sounds superb. But the story I think you're alluding to is that my engineer, who was superb who's working with me, Aber Pinheiro, he said, I've got a friend in Brazil. He's Brazilian, and he said, and I want to tell you that this song and this album saved his life. I said, what are you talking about? Um, and he said, well, I'm going to tell you a story. And he said, rather than tell you a story, let me get my friend on FaceTime. And he did. He got this his friend. I'm blanking on his name, and he said, you're one of my favorite bands. I said, thank you so much for saying that. And he said to me, I was in a very bad state of depression. I was really suicidal. And he said, and then I put on In a Glass House. I played it over and over, and it gave me hope to not do what I wanted to do and gave me some strength to continue to live, and it helped me get better. And now I'm well. But thank you for making this album, and saving my life. And boy, that really hit me big time. And
I was going to ask you to do hearing fans over and over again, like me, say you don't know how. I hate that phrase. It was the what do they say? The soundtrack of my life. It's a little trite, but in when I think I asked you previously, do you get tired of hearing people like me say you have no idea what kind of fan I was? But when you hear a story like that, that's still got to touch you. I mean, um, what could be a greater tribute than that?
well, of course, it was both heartrending knowing that this person was at the end of his rope, if you like, and the fact that our music helped save his life. And what can you say about that? That's the story which you if you don't get some kind of emotional feel about it, there's something wrong with you. Of course, I felt very sad for him, but also very happy that
Yeah.
we were able to contribute to getting him better, and for whatever reason.
And it's wonderful if it hasn't been discussed, if you haven't discussed it with anybody previously, you heard it first here. We're going to see some more remastered classics like Glass House. I think that's wonderful. When that comes out, I'd like to interview you again. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. And the last thing I wanted to tell you, towards the end of you did two albums, and one kind of relates to a story I'll tell here at the end. But one of them was Giant for a Day. Now, I know some of the fans didn't like it because it wasn't doing the same thing you were doing with everything else, or changing it up each time. They thought maybe you got a little too commercialized. And yet, I love that album. It's probably one of the only albums that I can play guitar to because it's more of a rocking album. I've tried to play some of your more complex songs, and I can't stretch my fingers where they need to go and play all the diminished chords and the time signatures. I'm just not that good. But I love the album. And I thought the really interesting thing is you have to be of a certain age to remember who Idi Amin was. So to throw that lyric in there, I thought was fantastic. And then it got really close to home to me. Civilian was actually recorded at Sound City in
Right.
wonderful Van Nuys, California, where I grew up as a kid. And I just thought that was a nice little capper on your career there. So now we move to the third stage of your career, and Gentle Giant has gracefully stopped being a band. Kind of, I've always admired bands like REM, Gentle Giant that just said it's time to stop and not do these endless reunion tours as much as maybe you had wanted to. But you're wondering about what you're going to do. It's 1982, and I guess Dan Young introduced you to Jerry Jaffe. Do I have that right?
Absolutely correct.
Uh,
Excuse me. Yeah, he introduced me to Jerry Jaffe, who was the head of what's called the rock department at Polygram Records, and said, "There's are you interested in being on the other side of the fence?" I was living in California at the time, and my initial reaction was no. Literally, that came out immediately, and
yeah,
he said, "Well, look, it's not just a regular record company. We're all putting this together. It's a new kind of idea. We'll all be in it together. And why don't you just come to New York and find out what it is?" I did. I came out to New York and sat down with Jerry, and he knew that I knew a couple of well-known radio promoters or radio consultants because they were fans of the band, and he offered me a job. Thankfully, he offered me a job, and suddenly I was in the the Darth Vader side of the business.
yeah.
I was the I swapped over sides, but I remember I moved out, to a 3-month rental in New York and going into my little office. And literally meeting, going from one office to another, meeting whoever was there. And at the end of the day, I called my wife and I said, I'm coming home tomorrow. I'm not doing this. I can't do it because I realized that every office, every person in those offices had their own priorities. And I
Yeah.
realized it wasn't the music business, it was the business of music. And boy, it was almost like had I known what this is about when I was in the band and able to do that, then I probably, maybe General Giant would have been as big as it should have been, if you like. But
Right.
nevertheless, my wife said, no, stay, look, give it a bit of time, get to know the people, which I did. And ultimately, it spawned a new kind of career for me.
And you were responsible for doing what people should have done for Gentle Giant, and that's getting you on the air,
On the
basically.
air, yeah, on the air initially, yes. And then basically after that, championing them in the company which means basically to get the promotion money, to get the marketing dollars, to make sure that they are a priority in the company. Because as I said, every office had their own priority. Ultimately, it was down to the head of the department or the head of the company. But during
Right.
that time, Polygram was in a state of flux, and so it was almost like from below, this rock department was able to come together. It was about 6 or 7 of us and make this company bloom and become a very, very important company. We had, Def Leppard, we had Bon Jovi, I signed, Sid Durant, I signed, Kiss, bands that became massive, and that was from underneath. It was a different, it wasn't from the top down,
Right.
which was a great opportunity, to be honest with you.
In a little bit there. So you got your first taste of corporate life, which can scar people for life. As a lifelong corporate guy, before I decided to break and do my own thing, I can tell you it's soul sucking at times. But you realize when you shed that, how much of your creativity comes back, all the overhead's gone, worrying about whether you got a job next week, all that stuff goes away.
Yeah,
You want to mention some of the groups that you ended up there's a great story in the book about Bon Jovi, and I love how you assured his mother as he's starting off as a naive artist, already in kind of a tight jam with his uncle, who's helped his career, but also kind of ironclad contracts. You helped him with that, but how you assured his mom you would take care of him,
yeah,
and that you did,
yeah,
and
yeah. No, John was, um, well, I didn't have to ultimately because John, um, was probably one of the most driven, um, persons and talented persons, but also driven to be the biggest. One of the stories, I don't know if it's in the book, but I just remember sitting down with him when the band was together with Richie and they recorded were starting to record their first album, and I sat down with John and I said, John, what's your ultimate ambition? Look at me right now, just me and you, because I'm hanging with him. And he looked at me and right in the eyes, he said, I want to be as big as Elvis or bigger. And when someone is either saying it just because they want you to believe it or saying it because they have to say it. But no, John meant it. He really,
yeah,
really meant it. And I could feel that. And I could feel that drive in him. And that kind of drive you can't bottle. You can't make up. And
no.
so that was always there. And so his drive together with ultimately a third album when we got Desmond involved, Desmond Child, and went up to Vancouver to make Slippery When Wet with Bruce Fairbairn and Bob Rock. We hit the jackpot with a third album with John.
And he wrote some great songs for Bon Jovi, did he not?
Oh,
Desmond?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, so then, and I'm trying to like, I don't want to leave anything out, but and it gets a little not convoluted, but very interesting. You meet Stephen Ross.
Well,
Am
yeah,
I
yeah. Well, after being comparatively successful, if you like. Um,
Yeah.
at Polygram, I signed, Cinderella, as well, and they became very, very popular. Kingdom Come, Dan Reed Network, even though they didn't break here, but they were in a band which I just love. I still do.
Yes.
Um, Men Without Hats. I brought in other bands. Then I thought, okay, I'm gonna
You
give.
were some hot shit at the time.
I was hot.
People wanted to.
I was hot shit. I was.
Let's be honest. I mean, it reminds me of a free agent in baseball. You tell some incredible stories how and it was kind of the culture back showering you with prostitutes and cocaine. I won't ruin who they are. Let them read it in the book. And it sounds like Stephen Ross was a breath of fresh air for you. That
Yeah,
there was and it might have, I don't know, it could have been anything, but these guys weren't going to sway you with that kind of stuff. You were a family man. You
right.
wanted to go home to your wife each night. And it probably made you feel a little bit dirty that they were trying to do that. I would have felt that.
I just thought not essentially dirty, but it felt silly because
Yeah.
they had no idea who I was and what I could do. And whatever the various characters we're talking about were trying to induce me to be part of that their teams. But
Yeah.
Steve Ross, I sat down with him and he said, "Look, we've got Warner and Elektra and Atlantic. We would love to have you re-energize our Atco records." And I said, "Sounds. I mean, I love what they had at Warner Music Group, should I say?" And I said, "Yeah, but it sounds interesting." He said, "You know what? You've met Ahmet. You went out to Turkey with him, which is you'll read
A
about."
trip. Yeah.
However, but then he said, "Look, I know that other companies are chasing you, but I think it'll be the best place for you because you'll answer to me. Don't worry about it." I said, "Okay, that sounds really interesting." And he said, and then I saw next to him a basket of trinkets from Jamaica. I didn't know it was from Jamaica. With a dollar, with little baskets of dollars, dollar baskets of, I can't remember what was inside. These hats and little lollipops or whatever. And I said, "Steve, would you mind? What is that right there?" He said, "We have a retreat in Jamaica," and he said to me, "Do you want one of these?" It was the basket would probably, this little basket was worth probably a
Yeah.
dollar or $2. And the fact that little gesture, it didn't say, "Do you want the whole basket?" He didn't say, "You
Right.
want this big office." He said, "Do you want one of these?" That clinched it for me. So
A far cry from plates of cocaine and prostitutes, eh?
exactly that. A dollar
Yeah.
basket from Jamaica. That was it.
That's a wonderful story right there. And I mean, to be president of Atco, that's a label I grew up. So many artists were on there, too many to list. Is that at that point then you're looking for more talent? And I'm wondering at this point, are you warming up to the new gig, so to speak, and enjoying finding talent, nurturing talent,
Yeah.
and marketing them and trying to make them a success? Was that starting to appeal to you quite a bit?
Well, yeah, certainly. Championing talent and looking for bands that were authentic and bands that well, obviously would sell as well. I mean, that's a whole different animal, and you had to balance those kinds of things. But I was really happy that I was able to utilize whatever I had and learned from Polygram, actually. And the Polygram situation was a good learning experience because it wasn't really a corporate issue, situation until there was a change that came in when a guy called Dick Asher came over. But I realized when I came to Atco that that situation was a lot more corporate. I
Yeah.
had but nevertheless, I was given the run of I was run. I had my label. I stole some people at Polygram for my staff, and I was able to sign bands like Pantera, Enough's Enough, boy, Dream Theater, and I was hands on with those kind of things, and
Yeah.
also there was a couple of bands that were on Atlantic, one in particular that were going to be dropped, and I had words with the Doug Morris, who was running Atlantic, about AC/DC. And we were talking, and they said their deal is really heavy, and the last couple of albums have been a stiff, and we don't like them anyway. Um, and we're going to drop them. I said, you can't drop AC/DC. They said, well, we were going to. And I said, I'll tell you what. I had inherited a couple of artists on Atco. One was Stevie Nicks, and the other was Pete Townsend. And I said, I'll trade you. I'll trade you a Stevie Nicks for an AC/DC.
See, there's another baseball analogy right there. I was just going to tell that story. A fantastic. First off, you're dealing with a guy that, despite his reputation, I think he did some great things, but he's looking at it as a business. You tell a great story where you say, well, I can just picture this maybe on a Friday afternoon. Who's your favorite band? Who's your favorite band? And he points to a spreadsheet showing the one that's grossing the most money. And that was his favorite band, where you had a different approach to it. But trading Pete Townsend for AC/DC was a master stroke, because AC/DC, you helped revive their career. They were open to you, not only in management, but they were open to you, helping them make a fresher sound, which I found interesting. You really did start to get involved in drawing on your background with Gentle Giant and Simon Dupree, and helping. There were times where you maybe you didn't get credit, but you were helping structure the song the way it should sound for a successful run, which I find that just fascinating.
Right. Yeah, that was a great experience to work with them and see how they worked. And they actually trusted me to come into the studio, where I know that they would not allow anyone prior to me being involved from the record company to be around their studio. So I got help actually from their elder brother, George Young, who was in the Easy Beats, who knew, getting back to Simon Dupree, who we did a lot of shows with. And I know that George, who produced some of their earlier albums, said to Angus and Malcolm, yeah, Derek Shulman's okay. He was in a band. So he's a musician, so he's cool, if you like.
Yeah.
And so they allowed me into their inner circle. So that was very special for me. And the fact that we went to Vancouver again, and we made the album, what's the deal? I like you on the name. But anyway, Thunderstruck came out, Razor's Edge.
Yeah.
Thunderstruck came out, and they were back, completely back. And I'm so happy that I was able to re-energize their fan base. And obviously Thunderstruck and Money Talks were huge hits for us and for them too.
Yeah, only a suit could say we're going to dump AC/DC. I mean, yeah, cultural icons, really.
I couldn't believe that, but so I did a trade.
So, and then lastly, so I guess you got tired of the backstabbing and people like Doug, and pretty much said, "Fuck you, I'm gone." And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and then you end up at Roadrunner Records.
yeah. Well, that was again a great experience as well, because Case Vessels, who was the owner, he literally lived around the corner from me, and he had this label, Roadrunner, and it was a death metal label, down in Soho. And he knew what I did, and he called me, about a few months after I left Atco, because I left. I said I can't do this anymore. It was the whole thing became so corporate and so politically charged. I'd had enough.
Yeah.
And he said, I'd like to speak to you about making Roadrunner an important label like you did at Atco. And I said, okay, but let's see what you have. So I went to his office and met the guys at Roadrunner, and it was fantastic. It was a complete 180 from where I was at the Warner Music Group. These are kids, I mean, men and women who lived the lifestyle of the rock and metal world. But Case didn't quite know that he had this. What he had was he was trying to build a company because he wanted to be an important company, and he had other labels that he bought, like a hip hop label and like a dance label and an indie band label at the same time as some of these bands that had been established. And I said, Case, what you have to do first is focus on what you do best. And he said, so what's that? I said, you've got a staff here, Monty Connor, who's the head of A&R. He's a star, and you've got the makings of being an incredible rock label. Get that first, and then you'll have the icing on the cake if you be really good at one thing first. And so I had to initially, if you like, get rid of the stuff that the label was not that good at. I mean, to have kids with ink and piercings, work hip hop and black music made no sense at all. And he had this label called Power Records in Atlanta. I said, you have to unfortunately divest yourself of these kinds of things and focus on what you really have and build from there. And what we did is that in the first year. And then in the second or third year, we built bands like Typo Negative and Fear Factory to another level. And then Slipknot came on. And then Monty said, this is a band I think we could really make happen. I went to see them and said, you're damn right we will. And that's where the priority went. And so I hit the green button and it blew up in an incredible fashion. And then the label was this, the label became a brand. And that was really important. And then I knew that we were big enough now to perhaps get even bigger on a different level. So I hired a good friend of mine, a guy called Dave Lonco from RCA, to be my head of radio promotion, which is very important in those days. Yep. Dave came in, and at the same time, a guy called Ron Bourbon, who was an A&R guy at Roadrunner, he used to come in with lots of tapes and used to play them to me. And I said, they'd all be great. And I said, Ron, not everything is great. Tell me what is really great and what's really good. And he came in one day and he said, I've got 6 bands, and they're really good, really all great. And he came in and he played them all. And I said, what's these 2? And he said, well, there's one band called Nickelback. They're from Vancouver. And there's another band I can't remember where it was. And he said, which one do you think is really great? He said, I'm not sure. What you tell me. Anyway, I played these couple, and I kept playing this song. Oh boy, I forgot this track.
The Leader of Men, or
thank you for reminding. Leader of Men from the first album. And when you keep playing it and you say, and then when you have a minute spare in your life and you think, let me put that track on again because it's really got me. And this band has got something that no one else has, and it got me. So I took it to Dave Lonco. I said, Dave, what do you think of this song? And he put it on and said, this is a fucking smash.
Yeah.
Let's sign this band. And I said, Ron, Nickelback is the one. And we went up to Vancouver, where they're from. And the Strangest Singers, they recorded The Stand in the first album. And no label wanted them even in Canada, which is amazing. So we signed the band for a decent deal, very cheap, comparatively cheap deal. And how that track, it did very well at radio. And then the next album was cut, Silver Side Up, and I remember the demo, How You Remind Me, listening to it. And they went into the studio, and I knew then that this album and this song was going to change Roadrunner forever. How You Remind Me came out, and it blew everything apart. It made this little death metal label in Soho become a huge independent label. And that was the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end of Roadrunner Records in certain respects.
I never understood why Nickelback got so. I mean, for some reason, the band people like to mention is a band that they hate. I watched that video for Leader of Men, and I think I've got the name right.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it's a great video. It's a great song. A very talented group. I don't know why they got the backlash that they did. So when you say this was the beginning of the end, is this? Can you tell your story about the group Twisted real quick? Because I think it's hilarious, and it might be. I know we're running late. It might be a great way to cap this. By the way, to everybody watching, we'll have when we do the post production, we'll have information how you can order this book, Giant Steps. And I'm telling you, this is a fantastic read. You do not need to be a fan of Gentle Giant to be thoroughly entertained by this book. It's well written. I couldn't put it down. It's 280 pages, and you'd be best to go ahead and don't, you may want to order it on Amazon. I think you do better by ordering it, where we're going to give you the ordering information. Maybe you can get an autographed copy. I don't know if that's still being offered, but highly recommended. And tell the Twisted story because it's hilarious.
It is.
I was laughing. It was just too good.
It was, kind of again a story which you have to live it and believe it when you see it and hear it. So I was sitting in my office, and Monty came in and said, "There's a label out of Chicago called Psychopathic Records." I was aware of them, Insane Clown Posse, and all that stuff that the white hip hop stuff that was going on. And they want to do a label deal with Roadrunner. And so I said, okay, that sounds interesting. And they've got this band called Twisted that they really think it could be a massive hit. I said, cool. So I sat there with Monty, and they put on a song, and it started playing. And I kind of looked up at them, and the song went on, and it was called a track called "Die Motherfucker Die." And I looked up at them and I said, "What do you know? What's that sample? That song you're playing, rapping over?" And I can't remember who it was. One of the two guys at Twisted said, "You don't know what it is. It's some group you probably never heard of. It's a group called Gentle Giant." And I said, okay. I mean, they had no idea that, who I was or what it was or whatever. And I said, whoa, and what it was, in fact, was a track called Spooky Boogie that was on Gentle Giant. I think it was on either Giant for a Day or
For a Day, absolutely.
And they literally said, "You've never heard of this band, Gentle Giant." So Monty, you have to take it from here because I got an appointment outside. Listen, guys, let Monty know how you feel. And I went outside. I thought, I can't listen to this, honestly. It's so bizarre. And Monty came out and said, "Man, I'm sorry about that." I said, "We can't sign them. I'm sorry." And but they already had released this track, and it was really blowing up. So it was like, oh boy, this is uncomfortable to say the least. But it was really funny that they said to me, "It's by a band called Gentle Giant that you've probably never heard of." I said, okay, you're right, maybe. I kind of agreed with them. I never heard of Gentle Giant and walked out.
It's just one of those moments you're going to remember the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And I tell you, when I heard it, I actually laughed on reflection because I wish I would call the song "Die Motherfucker Die" instead of "Spooky Boogie." It was a much better title.
Yeah, as usual, this goes way too quickly. We didn't get to talk about the heavy influence that Gentle Giants had on the hip hop community. And I think there's a level where, I've talked to you about this before, sampling you like wholesale playing the entire song in the background of your song and then disrespecting you. That's a different animal altogether. And I
Uh,
never got to talk to you about Monsters of Moscow, which is also a fascinating story. But for those of you that have tuned into this, you got to read that chapter as well. It's really it's hilarious and it's kind of scary. Derek, what can I say? I love talking to you, and I hope when Glass House is remastered and released, we'll get a chance to meet again. And thank you. You're so generous with your time. Everybody, read this book. It is really a lot of fun, and you won't put it down. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jim. Nice to see you again.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye bye.